Well, lucky, I felt inspired to do part 4 of this video. I realized there was something earlier in the videos that I hadn't quite mentioned, so I thought I'd give like 2 more examples that kind of illustrate 2 important ideas in macroeconomics. So, and we'll illustrate them with the graphs as well. So, assume the U.S. economy is back to full employment, but the Fed continues to utilize expansionary monetary policy. So first of all, what's going to happen in the money market? We've got the quantity of money. We've got the price of money, which is the nominal. Boy, I should really just slide over so I can write this a little bit nicer. Nominal interest rate. You've got a demand for money, and you've got the money, not the money supply, the supply of money. That looks better. And of course, if the Fed is continuing to do expansionary monetary policy, almost forgot to write in my equilibrium interest rate, so we'll put that as 0. If they continue to do expansionary monetary policy, maybe because they're concerned that the economy is going to slip back into recession or something like that, you're going to continue to drive down interest rates, and the quantity of money is going to be huge. Similarly, you're going to see a larger supply of loanable funds, so real interest rates are going to drop as well, at least in the short term. And in our aggregate demand, aggregate supply model, where we have our real GDP, and we assumed we had gotten back to long run. We had got back to full employment, which is at long run aggregate supply. That's at our potential GDP. We got our price level. And yeah, let me label that curve or that axis as well. And let's call this aggregate demand and short run aggregate supply. Well, if the Fed continues to do expansionary monetary policy, we're going to see a continued increase in aggregate demand, which is going to drive up price levels. Now we are into an inflationary gap. We're actually above full employment, and when we're above full employment, virtually nobody needs a job, and we're fighting for in the labor market. That's a graph maybe I didn't show here, but in the labor market, the demand for workers is really high, which drives up wages. Well, as you drive up wages, as we stated before, if nothing else changes, those higher wages increase. Those high wages increased. The other thing is, if prices went up, well, that also means input prices went up. So input prices are on the rise. If all of that is happening, supply is going to shrink back. We're going to need to get a new short-run aggregate supply. We'll call it 2 there. And our price level will continue to rise. Of course, if the Fed continues expansionary policy, we'll continue to have that effect. Demand will shift out, supply will shift back, and we don't get more production in the long run. All we get is just higher prices, and that's why we get that equation, MV equals PQ. That's kind of in the long run. If we're at full employment and we can't increase Q, sorry, I think your book actually referred to it as PY. If we can't increase Y beyond that full employment, the only thing that can increase if money supply is increasing is going to be the price level, which actually gives us then a long-run graph of the money market, which I don't think you're going to need that on the test, but essentially what that shows then is that in the long run, if we keep increasing the money supply, the value of money just drops. Then lastly, I wanted to show this on the Phillips curve here. So on the Phillips curve, we've got our, oops, try that again. short run Phillips curve, unemployment and inflation, and our long run Phillips curve. This is really the reason I wanted to show this example, is what's going to happen to the short run Phillips curve in the long run here. So we started kind of at point A, where we were at the natural rate of unemployment, so we'll just call that 5%, and we had, I don't know, pretty low inflation. Historically we've averaged around 3%, so I'll say 3%, even though that wasn't listed in the problem. What happens as we have that expansionary monetary policy, obviously price level is going up and unemployment is going down, so we're kind of shifting. Let's go to blue. We're kind of shifting along the curve. In the short run, we would move up to point B, where we've got higher inflation, and we've got, I don't know, what is that? We'll just give it a number even though it doesn't have one. We'll say 5%, but we've got less than 5% unemployment, which means we are actually above full employment. Well, if that continues to happen, and we just, there's nothing that brings aggregate demand back, then we're going to continue seeing this effect where the wages and such are going to go up. So after a while, wages are going to go up, and the new expected inflation rate, I'm expecting inflation to be 5, 6, 7, 8%. I'm going to be asking for a much higher pay raise each year, and so we're going to find ourselves shifting back to like a point C here with a new short run Phillips curve. In the long run, we actually shift that whole short run Phillips curve up if we keep having this, what we call demand pull, demand push inflation. The other thing that I wanted to show then, and there are probably lots of these things that we could show, but let's just do this last example, then call it good. Assume the U.S. is at long-run equilibrium when oil prices suddenly surge up after war breaks out in Saudi Arabia. Alright, so we were in long-run equilibrium. There we go. Long-run aggregate supply, aggregate demand. I know I should really call it short-run aggregate supply, but I'm going to leave it. Price level, GDP, that's that full employment level. Price level. Now, if oil prices suddenly surge up, well, what is that going to do? I mean, oil is used for manufacturing and shipping and producing just about every single good. It's somehow tied to just about everything. So if we have a huge jump in oil prices, we're going to get what we call a supply shock. It was a big unexpected change in input prices. So it's going to make it more expensive to produce goods, so we're going to have that decrease in production. Well, that leads us to a case of less than, I should call that Y1, less than full employment, but with some inflation. So the government might increase demand, increase government spending, but that just, so let's call this AD plus government, and it might even have a multiplier effect and everything. That might help temporarily get us back toward full employment, but unfortunately those higher price levels are going to continue to have the effect on aggregate supply of decreasing it, because you have to pay your wages, higher wages to your workers again. So aggregate supply is going to continue shifting back, and I'm going to label this PL3. And again, we're back down at less than full employment, and prices have just gone up and up and up. When you get a supply shock, that is the phenomenon known as stagflation, where you can't really get the economy going again. You can't get yourself back up to full employment, and you continue to have this inflation problem. So there you go. That's an example of stagflation. Now, I also said let's draw the Phillips curve on this. Because, by the way, this is kind of what happened in 1970s. This is historically what happened. So let's put our curves in. Unemployment. And I don't have room to write it, so I'm just going to review inflation on the y-axis there. That was horrible. Let me just put it here. Inflation. Well, that looks awful too. Whatever. So we started off at point A here, right? We were in log-run equilibrium. And what happened? Well, what happened was we went to a point, we went to a point that had higher unemployment and higher inflation. That doesn't fit at all the model of the Phillips curve. The model of the Phillips curve thought there was a trade-off. If we had that high inflation, we would move up to here, or if we had high unemployment, we'd end up with lower inflation. We'd come down here. But in reality, what happened? Both of those things. And so the Phillips curve in the 1970s kind of got a hit, because it didn't really work as a model for what was happening. And so time ago when we first started the Phillips curve, I mentioned that it's not as strong a relationship as maybe we'd like to think it is. The 1970s kind of blew that model apart a little bit when we had this problem of stagflation from that supply shock. Alright, that was mostly for your own edification, but you might need to know what a supply shock looks like graphically. That's that nasty graph there. And you should probably also know what that demand push inflation looks like, where your demand is pushing us above full employment, and eventually supply will shift back because of those higher wages and those higher input prices, bringing us back to full employment. Alright, I think that is it for my videos, unless you tell me you love them and you want to see a whole bunch more of them. Alright, peace out.